Shikama Wetu. And welcome to lesson 402, which is, of course, the second part to my 400 series in which we're getting into the translations and the proper pronunciation of the ancient Egyptian and also ancient Hebrew languages, connecting them with the proper Ki-Ba-Ntu and Ki-Kongo languages, which means the languages of Africa. So I know I didn't get much into the Hebrew in the first lesson. However, what I'll probably end up doing is alternating back and forth, even though I will, throughout the lessons, show the connection between the Hebrew, ancient Egyptian, of course, the other Ki-Kongo languages, and kind of intermix. But as far as main focus, I'll try to alternate ancient Egyptian, Hebrew, vice versa, and whatnot. So for this one, 402, we're going to pretty much go into the Hebrew translations, definitions, proper pronunciations, and also its relation to the other, as I said, Ki-Kongo or Ki-Ba-Ntu languages, which are the African languages. Now, I have to clear something up before I get in depth with this Hebrew translation. And I know I will garner quite a few one-finger waves from both the white and the black side of this argument. But as you've heard throughout my lesson series, I've said that there are no such things as Hebrews, Israelites, etc. And when we argue over the Khazars, which right now the so-called Jews that are living in that land near Africa, that they've named Israel in the 1940s, whether we're talking about them versus the so-called Ethiopic Hebrews and the so-called original African Hebrews, if we're arguing this concept on the pretenses of our misunderstandings of the Bible, as you see, then we have a serious disconnect in our understanding of this book, of who Hebrews are, of the pronunciation of the word Hebrew itself, and also of the Hebrew language as a whole. Now, I will say, as many scholars have known, and many people who translate these languages have known, that the word Hebrew does not exist in any other language except English. The word Hebrew does not even exist in its own language. Now, I will spell out some of these words that I'm saying according to the Hebrew alphabet, so you can actually print out a Hebrew alphabet or whatnot. I may provide one for you, but you can actually write them down yourself, get a Hebrew translator guide or a book or whatnot. I will show how the argument of white versus black Hebrew, Hebrew Israelites versus Comedics, and all of these things. I'm going to show you how this is nonsense because you're not understanding who Hebrews are. Now, I say that because, first off, the word for Hebrew, referring to a Hebrew person, writing this in the Hebrew language, the word would be spelled Ain, Bait, or Bet, Ra, or Rash, Yod, which would break down into the sounds of sort of a long A, Ain, B, R, Y, or I. Now, this is sometimes translated as Iberi, Ivri, Iberia, and whatnot. If you are familiar with the Hebrew language, or if you have a cursory understanding of the language, you will know that the way Hebrew is read, it is read from right to left, rather than the left to right of the English language and some of the other Latin-derived languages. So when we read it from right to left, a lot of times we have to understand that throughout the years when these languages are being translated, they're being translated according to the rules of the translator's language. So if we, let's say, for instance, in English, if I write a story in English and I give it to a Japanese or a Chinese translator, they would translate it in the direction of their language. And some of my words and things and my pronunciations may get mixed up, jumbled up according to how they're translating it into their language and according to the direction that their language is written. So keep that in mind, because it's going to be very important of how I translate much of this Hebrew language. Now, again, speaking of the Hebrew people, often pronounced Iberi, Ivri, Iberia, and something of the sort, we have an understanding so-called that this word comes from the word ber, which means to cross over. But we have to correct that, and we'll correct that first and foremost. So if we take a look at this ayin, bait, ra, yod, which is the long A, B, R, Y written backwards, if we take this word from left to right, we get Y, R, B, and the long A. If we fill in the vowels, we would get the word Yoruba. You understand? So that's the first and most important thing I need you to understand about why I say the Hebrew Israelites, so-called Khazar Jews, whatever this whole thing is about, this is why I've been saying the whole time that is not the real definition nor origin of the word Hebrew. That is not the word. The word and the story, speaking of any Hebrews, is talking about the Yoruba people and the Yoruba stories, spirituality, and cosmology. Now, if we take a look at it, both the Yoruba and the Dogon say that they came from the East. So once you get the understanding that Shikoma, as we recall from 401, and you get the proper understanding that the entire northern hemisphere of the land you now call Africa, that entire northern hemisphere was called Chikoma. So therefore, those who were in the East and those who were in the West practiced the spirituality, and they had the same origins. So when we speak about the Dogon and the Yoruba people, then we are actually speaking about the ancient Bakuma. You understand? I will prove this as I continue to go along. When we speak about the plural version of the Hebrew people, supposedly pronounced Iberium, Ivrim, and whatnot, when we spell this word out again from right to left, it is spelled Ayin, Bait, Ra, Yod, Mem. Now, the Hebrew language, according to the way we're taught in the modern Hebrew language, according to Eliezer ben Yehuda, he made it so that the I-M, M or Yim at the end of the words is supposed to be plural for masculine nouns. But we need to correct this as well, because the pronunciation is not Yim, it's not Im. If we take this word and we apply it to what we just talked about as far as spelling backwards the Yoruba people, then what we get is Ama Yoruba, or also pronounced Omo Yoruba, which means the nation of the Yoruba people. Oma Yoruba. Now, this word Omo and also Ama, you can see it in other Ba-Ntu peoples, such as the Amazulu, the nation of Zulu people. So it's the same concept here. So again, you heard me mention the Dogon, because the Dogon and the Yoruba people are of the same origin. They are the same people. And when we look at the Hebrew language, we have a word that spells Dogon. And that is spelled Dalit Gimel Nun. D-G-N, often pronounced Dagon, but of course we're looking at Dogon. Now, how do we say that this is Dogon? Well, the Dogon people, are called the people of the cliffs because of their dwelling places. Of course, they're known for their extravagant cosmology, okay, which can only come from Ku-Kongo and the Ba-Kongo people. But they're also known for the crops that they grow and the crops that they eat. And oftentimes, this is grain or corn. They're known as the people of the grain and the people of the corn. So this word DGN, Dalet Gimel Nun, in the Hebrew language, it actually means grain or corn. So this is how you know that the direct correlation of this Hebrew word means the Dogon people, because it describes what they are renowned for. And one more thing I want to clear up before we get further into the lesson is that we have to understand that this Hebrew that is spoken today, again, created by Eliyahu ben Yehuda for the Jews, right now the white Khazars, he created this language, but this language, it was a mix of Polish, Germanic, so-called Germanic languages, basically, Nordic and Germanic. And what this became known as was Yiddish. This word Yiddish, if you take the consonantal spelling, this word Yiddish is spelled Yod Dalet Shin. Okay, YDSH, Yiddish. But if we look at this again, we reverse the spellings before they stole the language, and this word Yiddish would be spelled Shin Dalet Yod, which means Shaddai. Of course, coming from Afaraka. So they're telling you where they stole everything about the language that they speak. So this is why I say I have to clear all of this up before we get too far into the lesson, because we have to make sure that we understand that there was no European, there were no Khazar, there were no Russian, there were no German, there were no type of any other people, period, that had anything to do with the creation of the original language that you now call Hebrew. So now that that's out the way, let's get into some of the connections of Hebrew, Ba-Ntu, Congo, and also Chikoma language.